Welcome to Ad Age Studio 30 Live. I'm John Dioso, the editor of Ad Age Studio 30. Today we're going to discuss how to build next-gen customer experiences when the world turns upside down. One of the certainties since the onset of the pandemic was how it transformed customer behavior and expectations. And over a year of living and working online, people yearn for physical in-person experiences, yet demand the convenience and quickness of the digital experience that they've been exposed to during this era. But if there's one thing if there's one industry that can teach all marketers how to weather disruptions, it's the music business, which has been dealing with existential crises of one kind or another for much of the 21st century. Joining me today to discuss how marketers can best respond to these transformed customer expectations and anything else when the world turns upside down are Jamison Antoine, VP of Global Customer Experience at Warner Music Group, and Josiah Johnson, Principal in the Consumer Experience Technology Practice at Ernst & Young. Welcome, Jamison and Josiah.
Thanks for having us, John.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for joining me, and welcome everybody. Thank everybody out there. Thank you for joining us, and please drop us a note and tell us where you are in the world so we can give you a shout out later. All right, guys, before we get going, please tell our audience just a little bit about yourselves and what you do at your respective companies. Jamison first, and then Josiah.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm Jamison Antoine. I lead customer experience at Warner Music Group. What I have the opportunity to do is work with some of the most passionate fans in the world for some of the most talented artists in the world, whether it's Coldplay or Cardi B, Dua Lipa, Rico Nasty, Red Hot Chili Peppers. We get to really be the stewards of that customer experience. And our ambition is to treat our customers like superstars. So in a nutshell, that's what we do on the e-commerce side of those artist businesses.
And Josiah?
Yeah, and hi, Josiah Johnson. I'm a principal here at EY, and my day-to-day, I spend my time with a lot of our customers, leveraging data and analytics to drive authentic customer experiences with a broad range of our customers globally. So happy to be here and excited to have some dialogue with Jamison.
Me too. Now let's get into it. So Jamison, you just mentioned a whole bunch of amazing artists. What lessons can be learned from the music business, from how the music business connects with its customer base? You mentioned fans, particularly how fans interact with artists. And then what is Warner Music Group's role in managing that relationship and experience?
Yeah, thanks. One of the as somebody who grew up just loving music, being a big hip hop fan, and understanding how music has impacted and changed my life. One of the things that we have to respect in our business is that it's more than music. That song, that artist is helping somebody get through a difficult time. Maybe it's a breakup. Maybe that song reminds you of your wedding anniversary, or it's grandpa's birthday or grandpa's favorite band. It goes deeper than just the music.
Grandpa's favorite band? You mean like Outkast, or?
Well, Outkast in my case, or Grateful Dead and others. So I think one of the things that we really honor and respect is one, art is artistry, and making sure we respect the artist, but two, understanding that that the relationship between the artists and their fans is so deep. You can dismiss it at times, but really what the artists are doing is really helping people get through moments and creating memories. And as an organization, it's our job to support our artists and also respect the people who spend money with them, who stream with them, who dedicate, put tattoos on their arms of these artists. That's our responsibility.
That's great. We're going to dive a little deeper into like all the various ways and learnings you had from the past year. But first, I want to just throw it to Josiah for a second and say, are we comparing apples and oranges if we try to extrapolate lessons from a singular industry, the music business, to other industries? So it reminds me of something that Jamison said in a previous chat. He said, is selling soap really that different from selling Cardi B earrings?
I mean, I'll give a consulting answer and say yes and no, but I think, in all reality, I think, both, the musicians as well as, kind of the music industry, similar to a lot of brands, are trying to, develop authentic relationships with their consumers. And I think that became even more important out of the pandemic because, you weren't able to have as many physical experiences. So how could you be innovative and, create, digital experiences to better connect with your consumers? And it was funny. I was talking to a colleague of mine who is in Las Vegas at a Fish concert, and they have like a tradition of doing these like really intricate, Halloween live concerts. But what they've started to do now is introduce kind of like a digital aspect, a digital journey to connect to with their fan base prior to even the show. So they create a whole persona around their band. Like this one, it was like something about like they were a sci-fi, music group from the future, and they started planting little social seeds, across the metaverse, if you will, to engage their consumers and kind of drive that fan base and that interaction. And so it's things like that brands can do to be like creative and engage and be authentic, to like, build better brand affinity, which then leads to, the ability to drive more, conversion from a product or service standpoint.
And Jamison, so going back to the earrings, how is selling Cardi B earrings, or more importantly, Cardi B records and concert tickets, just like selling soap? And how is it uniquely not at all like a person's relationship to typical consumer goods?
Well, yeah, I think the first thing is that obviously there's the human being and human beings behind the art. Obviously, they're creating music, they're creating a product. And it's similar in that, yes, they are earrings. We are charging. It is e-commerce, so there are things that we have to. There's things that the customer expects, because they're not always shopping on the Cardi B website. They're not always on the Ed Sheeran website shopping for things. We're also competing for a share of wallet. So we know that before they got to our website, maybe they were at another retailer. So one of the things that we have to keep top of mind is what's happening when they're not on the Cardi B site buying earrings. What happens when they're at maybe Sephora or at Macy's buying something, and are we offering a comparable experience? Because that's what the customer expects. Even though they're passionate about the artist, we have to think about the best practices and how other retailers might be pushing the envelope for the customer experience. So in that way, it's similar. Where I think where it differs is this is again something that really could mean something to, like I said, to grandpa, right? We know that this is their favorite band or mom's favorite artist, and you want to get it for a gift or for the 16th birthday. So I think those are the kind of, I'd say, similarities and differences between the two.
Great. Josiah, in a recent article that we collaborated on, actually, you wrote about how brands successfully navigated the singular challenges of the pandemic and how marketers can apply those strategies to future campaigns. How did the disruption caused by the pandemic profoundly change the relationship between brands and customers?
Yeah, well, one of the biggest things that came out of the pandemic is you had this huge consumer base that was forced to be more digital. They couldn't go into stores. They weren't getting their newspapers delivered from a content standpoint. And so I think, one of the biggest things now is to recognize that there's a whole new populace that has been educated, to leverage digital interactions with brands. And so I think really trying to leverage that from a segmentation, targeting, content, affinity, loyalty and membership became even more important during the pandemic because, we saw with, some of our customers, people that participated in loyalty and membership programs were getting 40% lifts in conversion in their shopping carts. So there's some like direct, alignment to, kind of building that loyalty and membership. And when the aperture of your potential consumer base has now, opened up from like what we used to call digital native to now digitally savvy, I think there's a huge opportunity to like leverage that new, aspect of consumer in kind of your marketing strategy, whether it's segmentation, targeting, content, or just even product affinity as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even little things on our end, and you might say, well, yeah, of course, why wouldn't you do that? But we've had to think about, and we, even before the pandemic, going back to what I said, you have different types of customers, whereas the fan of 21 Pilots might be a 17-year, 18-year-old young man or woman. but the person making the purchase might be mom or dad, or again, grandma or aunt, or so thinking about the fan and who's the kind of economic buyer in that case, and making sure that we're the language on the site makes sense to both sets of folks, right? The teenager or that college student might understand the nomenclature that's happening over here because they're in the space. That person that's buying the product as a gift has a different perspective. So doing things that make it easy for them to move down the funnel, little things, direct linking. If you're going to show a hat, direct link directly to the hat, right? I don't want to see the whole store. That we've seen how that impacts conversion. So being very mindful about the small details, because you've had this acceleration of people, like Josiah said, adopting digital and maybe shopping online where they weren't before, is something that we've definitely put a greater focus on, is making sure that we're paying attention to those details.
Yeah, and I think, real quickly, just kind of piggyback on that, I think the other thing too is just like fulfillment. The interaction with the consumer doesn't stop once they click buy or purchase, on the website. I think really kind of simplifying, really understanding like how you fulfill that product or service on the back end side. A lot of the companies that I saw, weather and even be successful through the pandemic had really simplified their supply chain. And at the very least, really had a clean and clear understanding of the consumer needs and behaviors throughout the entire journey, and a strong CRM practice, because even if you're going to be delayed on delivering a product, you should be communicating with that consumer, because now there's so much competition for for that brand loyalty, that if you don't have that authentic voice and that relationship and continuously communicate, even if you're delayed or there's issues with the product or service, consumers care about that. They care that they're being heard and proactively being communicated to. So those are some things that I saw both from a technique and a practice standpoint that I think really elevated a lot of the brands, through the pandemic.
Absolutely. I think that's huge. And we know that it's easy to kind of take for granted what I talked about, that passion for the artist, and that, hey, they'll be there. But one of the things that we know is that they can be very forgiving of the artist, because again, the artist means something to them. But what we've stressed is communication and a sense of urgency. That's part of the framework that we move within our customer experience group, is whether we're talking about communicating that via email or communicating those fulfillment times on the artist websites. If there are issues or delays, how do we adjust those, or be upfront with the customer? They are very forgiving, because that passion is there, but it's not something that we want to take for granted. We do want to make sure that there's a sense of there's communication, and that there's a sense of urgency in getting them their product, obviously, and getting back to them.
All right, and if you're just joining us, this is Ad Age Studio 30 Live. I'm John Dioso, the editor of Ad Age Studio 30, and this is a great conversation with Jamison Antoine, the VP of Global Customer Experience at Warner Music Group, and Josiah Johnson, Principal in the Consumer Experience Technology Practice at Ernst & Young. And we're here discussing how to build next-gen customer experiences when the world turns upside down. Before we get to the conversation, though, I'd like to say hi to some of our viewers. Shout out to Mia, Tracy, Catherine Ann, Barat, and Caroline. Thank you so much for joining us. And let's get back to the question. So, just in line with some of the stuff that you guys were just talking about, Jamison, Josiah brought up the Fish concert in Vegas, and all the different activations and the ways they were able to both make that happen, but also communicate it and communicate with their fans digitally. Going back to the whole idea behind the live concert experience, you'd have to have been, your head had to have been in the sand for 2 years. You didn't realize, the immense damage that the pandemic did to the live concert industry. But in line with Josiah was saying before about how brands met that singular challenge, there must have been some silver linings. I think communication and the kind of getting the message that that's one of the best way to stay in touch with your fans was, one of the silver linings that came out of the past year. Can you mention any other ones that Warner Music Group experienced?
I think what the entire industry experienced was all of the opportunities now. When you talk about digital, you talk about metaverse is something that's been, buzzing around, live streams. that I thought about what happened on Fortnite last year with an artist that's not signed to Warner, but with Travis Scott, where you had almost 12 million players participate in that performance. And to put that in context, that's a population larger than the size of New York City that's able to see this artist perform, right? You had things like our group, 21 Pilots, do shows on Roblox, or Tones and I do something on Fortnite as well. And I think the silver lining there is that it kind of blows the doors off of this idea of kind of time and space. You couldn't get 12 million people at MetLife Stadium, right? It makes it, we have this conversation now about diversity and inclusion. I think it made it a lot more inclusive for you to be able to see Wiz Khalifa do a virtual show from sitting on your couch, right? If you couldn't make it to the show in Pittsburgh, or you couldn't make it down to Atlanta, or couldn't afford it, one of the things that came out of it is that there's this opportunity that you can have the live experience, but you could be much more inclusive and find other ways to monetize the experience, So I think that's a silver lining for the industry, that it was there, but now, people from all around the world can not only interact with the artists, but interact with people who are just as passionate about the music as they are. I think that's the big silver lining. Is it's another way of looking at how we could be more diverse and inclusive in the business, and the I want to say the pandemic, but the technology and what we had to do in response to the pandemic has opened those doors. And I think that's what's exciting, and that's what's here to stay.
And one of the things, Josiah, you can comment on this too, is reaching new audiences, maybe people that weren't able to get to the concert, they couldn't travel to, that maybe couldn't afford a live ticket as opposed to a virtual ticket online. But then that's also stuff, maybe this is something you can speak to, Josiah, connecting, if you're connecting with somebody in that digital way, it's just another touch point to reach a potential fan / customer. Could you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's like, to Jamison's point, it's created like a whole mechanism for consumer engagement that, has been around, but it's been, the aperture is gotten a lot wider, especially in the sense that now it's not just about the 15 million. It then becomes like, can I do a one-to-one intimate relationship with my icon, as whether it's a contest or whatever. You have things like, Cameo, where it's like you can pay, a certain amount of dollars and you can get a birthday greeting from Pauly Shore. Like, those are the types of things where you can now, yeah, this is a true story. I have a friend who did that. So I laughed.
Right. Who's that?
Yeah, exactly. And we're aging ourselves again. Dang it, outcast. But I think, that's the opportunity now too. It's not just about like, I can now access this 15 million viewers. I can have these discrete one-to-one relationships with consumers that actually want to engage your brand, or to Jamison's point, like to an icon like a Cardi B. That's now what we have the ability to do and drive. And it's not just that, the notion of like, I'm going to go to the concert, but I might have the opportunity to talk directly to Cardi B. And now, like, organizations like, Warner Brothers Music can facilitate those types of interactions, which, we've never really been able to do. And I think the pandemic was a force and function to get creative and innovative on how do you create those relationships with consumers. And so lots of brands are trying to think about that. What's the broader connectivity strategy, but then also what are these intimate relationships that I can create? And then how do you amplify those interactions as well?
We're not, Jamison, we're not talking about replacing the live concert experience, because there's nothing like seeing somebody in person. It's more like enhancing it and expanding, like Josiah was speaking to.
Absolutely. And I think, people are itching to go back and see something live. I went to a show a couple of weeks ago and I was like, man, there's nothing like this energy. You can't replace it, but you can, like I said, you can make it more accessible and inclusive. And I think, I like the idea of both, right? A friend of mine talks a lot about this concept of both, that it doesn't have to be either or. You could do the live stream and have the live show. And something that Josiah mentioned earlier about segmentation. you don't have to offer it to everyone, right? I mean, you
Mhm.
can say, man, these are my diehard fans. These are because we have data, we could say these are the people who have a high purchaser value, right? These are repeat purchasers. Let's create a room, a VIP room just for those folks. These are people who, engage with us, right? You could kind of carve out and say, well, maybe everybody doesn't see this, but we're going to offer this to the person that's got the tattoo on their arm, right? The diehard. So if you choose to, right? Or you can make it open to everyone. And so I think there's something to being able to segment your audiences now because of the digital experience that maybe from a live experience you would not have been able to do. Well, you could still do with VIP experiences and those kind of things, but now it's kind of just extended it into these other realms.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, going back to kind of the loyalty and kind of, membership kind of scenarios too, I think, before it used to be like, companies would just like, okay, as part of your loyalty, you'll get discounts off products. Now it's about like getting access to, exclusive events or experiences, et cetera. And so like, now people are trying to be a lot more creative on, how can I engage my consumers, how to, my high value customers, how can I provide, services on top of, discounts, et cetera, that will keep them engaged with my brand because of the competitive nature, around products and services that we, deal with today.
Great. Jamison, we can't talk about the connection. We've been talking about the strong connections between fans and artists. And we can't talk about that without addressing the social issues that dominated so much of the past couple of years. Right. How did issues like Black Lives Matter and or the election or the pro and anti-vaccine movement affect relations between Warner Music Group artists and fans? And what is your responsibility, Warner Music Groups, regarding the customer experience on such issues?
Well, I think, like I said in the prep, I don't want to give my corp comms people a stroke, so I'm going to have Jamison's opinions. But yeah, I think listen, they're in line. I will say that I'll start off by saying that one, people refer to Black Lives Matter as a movement, and this is my life. This is before it was a movement. This is something that African Americans have been saying since Reconstruction, since before Reconstruction. So. It's not a movement. It's not something that started with George Floyd. It's a continuation of what we saw with whether it was Rodney King or going back to the 60s, the 30s, the 20s. This is not something new. I think what happened is that, again, because of digital, because of the phone and technology, you couldn't turn a blind eye to it. I was very proud of before we even got to the organization. I was very proud of these two women at Atlantic Records who just said, we're not doing this. We're not going to pretend like this is not happening around us. We're not going to pretend like this does not affect African-American employees. We market music by young African-American men and women, which is one of the biggest drivers for 18 to 44-year-olds in the music business, which is hip hop and R&B. So we're not going to pretend like this man being murdered in the street, we're just not going to continue on. And I was very proud of these two women who just said, the show has to stop. And it kind of brought the industry to its knees and said, we're going to address this. And it didn't come from the top down. It came from the passionate employees. And I felt like the way that our organization responded to that, the organization put together a $100 million fund. They've since now started working with about 9 different organizations. They're being very intentional about where they're working, whether it's investing in financial literacy, education, the arts, and just really answering the call of the employees that we want something done by that. There's a Frederick Douglass quote of power concedes nothing without demand. And I think the employees demanded it, and the company responded to it in a way that I was proud of, and our coworkers stood up and took action. So I'll say that as the line there. So just in terms of our response, I was proud of that. I think our artists spoke out, and that in the whole space across the industry, fans customers, everyone wanted to know, hey, where do you stand? You can't stick your head in the sand and say, hey, it's business as usual, because if you get to the money, you're talking about your customers. These are, whether you're doing B2B or D2C, you have African American customers, you have Asian American customers, you have people that are spending money with you. And if you're going to just pretend like nothing is happening, then you're ignoring your biggest stakeholder, which is your customer. So that's how I'd answer that question, and I think that's how we responded to that. This conversation that's been going on for 400 years. It wasn't last year. I just want to be clear. That wasn't last year. It's been a 400-year conversation, and unfortunately, George Floyd was kind of the latest victim of that. But it certainly did not die in vain.
Well, Jamison, if that's your way of avoiding the answer,
hopefully nobody in court comes. I like working here, so hopefully I wasn't too militant.
I think you said plenty. You said plenty.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you actually touched on this in your articles. I'd love you just to address the article and how it kind of ties into the benefits and pitfalls of brand purpose and social consciousness. So go ahead, Josiah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I love, Jamison's Frederick Douglass, quote when he talks about demand, and the demand, is not just from your employees, but also from your consumers. And, EY did a lot of consumer research, like trying to understand the psyche of the consumer during the pandemic. And, one of the biggest things that, I gleaned from it was, the need for brands to, have better understanding of kind of the social issues that are facing their consumers. Because, I mean, from a true, commerce standpoint, consumers are more apt to spend more money for products and services at companies that they feel align to their, to their social, goals and ideals. And so you see, companies like Nike, for example, who, literally created a chief purpose officer. And it was really to try to align, the brand to what they cared about and what they thought their consumers cared about. And so I think you're seeing a lot more companies taking a stand, for better or for worse. And, I think there's a lot of political arguments, for that. But I think, the critical piece is, being authentic in kind of, that voice, going back to, the whole, Black Lives Matters, George Floyd. You can't just go check a box and said like, hey, I started a fund and, I gave money to these, to historically Black, colleges, yada, yada. You got to be real with it, because consumers are smart. I mean, they'll get it that, you're just doing it from a PR stunt versus you really care about it and you're really trying to drive better connectivity and impact in the world.
Well, thank you guys so much. We went a little long, but I think our audience would agree that it was definitely worth it. That's unfortunately all the time that we have today. Thank you to Jamison Antoine, VP of Global Customer Experience at Warner Music Group, and Josiah Johnson, Principal in the Consumer Experience Technology Practice at Ernst & Young. Thanks for joining me. And most of all, thanks everybody out there for joining us for Ad Age Studio 30 Live. I'm John Dioso. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.